So is this impeachment process based on evidence or politics? To break that down, we're joined by Alex Panetta and Todd Zwillich from Vice News. And Alex, let's start with you. In a nutshell, what's the case the Republicans are making here for impeaching U.S. President Joe Biden?
So to answer your first question, the answer is both. There's smoke around Joe Biden and around his family, but no fire yet. I mean, to quote an old Hollywood movie title, you could call this impeachment process the quest for fire. Because here's what we know and what we don't know. One, we know the president made statements that were at best untruthful, and at worst, he lied when he said his son never drew foreign money from China and other places, and when he said he never talked business with his son. Two, we know his son did, in fact, get lots of money from abroad, including from some pretty shady characters. A couple of his business partners were accused and convicted of corrupting public officials. A third was accused of corruption in China, and he went missing there. He'd been close to the government in Beijing. We now know that Joe Biden repeatedly met some of his son's business partners. And by the way, Hunter Biden never registered as a foreign lobbyist, which is potentially a crime. Now, number three, here's where things get hazy. We know there are allegations, and I repeat, allegations, that Joe Biden got some of this money. The most incendiary allegation of all comes from an anonymous informant to the FBI who says he heard from someone that Joe Biden got some of this money corruptly when he was vice president, and it influenced policy making on Ukraine. Now, here's what we don't know. We don't know whether any of this stuff, the stuff involving Joe Biden, is real. After all, I mean, he's the guy who matters here. His troubled son is not the president. None are his other relatives who did foreign paid work. He is the president. So we don't know whether there are any grounds whatsoever to impeach him. And now they're investigating and looking for that proverbial fire.
All right, Todd, weigh in. What's your assessment of the evidence?
I'm a little less sanguine about the smoke and fire analogy there. There definitely is some evidence that Hunter Biden has behaved inappropriately overseas. There's no question about that. But it is also true that Hunter Biden can't be impeached and Hunter Biden's not the president. There are specific allegations, I should say specific innuendo that Republicans are using now as they start this impeachment inquiry around Joe Biden. One is that he took bribes. He's corrupt and he took bribes. They have produced no evidence to back that up. The other is that he executed U.S. policy as vice president, particularly in Ukraine, to benefit his son's business dealings. And there's no evidence of that either. There just isn't. Republicans have been investigating this for about 9 months, and they haven't come up with that. And you can see it in the language that they use on Capitol Hill and elsewhere when they talk about some of the smoke that admittedly is around the sun. Oh, there is around the sun. They say payments to the Biden family. Did you know the Biden family has taken this money? Did you know the Biden family got millions of dollars from overseas? You always hear that qualifier, that caveat, the family. When it comes to Joe Biden himself, which is ostensibly what one would want to show or prove in order to show a high crime or a misdemeanor, which is in the Constitution for impeachment, they haven't produced that evidence. They just haven't.
Alex, take us behind the politics here then. We heard what you think about the evidence. What's in this for the Republicans politically?
Yeah, well, bashing Joe Biden is the glue that binds together the Republican Party. And these days, Republicans are desperately in need of a bonding agent because the caucus in Congress risks cracking apart. And it turns out the glue is impeachment, or at least an impeachment investigation. Remember, Republicans have the smallest majority in Congress, just 5 seats in the House. And Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker, has a tenuous and fragile grasp on his speakership. If he loses a few votes, he loses power. And it's all coming to a head right now. He faces his biggest test, because his party needs to pass a budget, and that process is completely stalled. They can't even pass the easy parts of a budget, like defense funding. And there could be a government shutdown in 2 weeks. And so they're all fighting each other about a whole bunch of issues, including funding for Ukraine. So what does McCarthy do? He says, hey, guys, let's work together and go after Joe Biden. It's basically, he promises an impeachment investigation in exchange for budget votes. Now, you might say this is a weird way to run a lemonade stand. But behind that, there's real political pressure. Many Republican politicians want McCarthy to do this, and they're feeling the pressure because much of their base voters wants this. And when you look behind at those base voters, they're being whipped up by the man behind the curtain, the real leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump. Trump is threatening to primary Republicans who fail to impeach. And the reason Trump wants this is, think ahead to the next election. Trump faces 91 criminal charges so far. And he wants to be able to say to voters, look at Biden. He wants voters talking about Biden's misdeeds, not his own. So if you're looking for the political reasoning, it starts with Donald Trump right there and moves on to the grassroots, to the members of the party in the Congress and ultimately onto the party leader, Kevin McCarthy. And that's why McCarthy folded this week and broke his own promise to take a slower approach on impeachment.
Todd, we know from Canada looking towards the United States how it is a polarized country. It is a country where a lot of people spend time hearing things within an echo chamber, fed by their favorite, all news channel. How do you think this impeachment process, though it may not end with success from the Republican standpoint, how it's going to play within that echo chamber of either all Republicans or at least Trump Republicans?
Well, I think they've already shown that there's precedent for this. There's precedent for the dynamic that was just very ably described, which I agree with, by the way, from Republicans. Look, Republicans have been saying since before they were elected, since at least August of 2022, months before they were elected to run this House, that they were going to be trying to impeach Joe Biden. They said they were always going to do this, according to them, and now they're doing it. It's revenge. For Donald Trump. He was impeached twice, and he wants to make sure he's not the only guy. But there is precedent for how this plays in a media that winds up covering a political race that's ultimately between two parties, ultimately between two guys. The media tends to cover the story as just kind of an equal race among equals, and you can exploit that if you know how to do it. The precedent is Benghazi. Remember the Benghazi investigation 2015, right before the 2016 election? The target of that investigation was the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton. And Kevin McCarthy himself in 2015 tanked his own first shot at being Speaker because he went in front of a camera and was asked about the utility of an investigation that really, in the end, didn't produce much evidence against Hillary Clinton. And he said, "What do you mean? It was a big success. Look how we tanked her poll numbers." He said it himself, and it helped make him not Speaker back then. And that's the precedent here. What Republicans are relying on so far, without the direct evidence so far that we've discussed, is they're relying on a media that covers this story. On the one hand, you're going to be hearing a great deal of sworn oath in court testimony about Donald Trump's alleged criminality between now and the election. He may be a convicted felon on election day. And what Republicans need is for the average voter to say, yeah, Trump's corrupt, but both guys are corrupt. They need enough innuendo, enough smoke, enough coverage of both sides of a scandal between now and then to just taint Joe Biden with the idea that he's just as corrupt as Donald Trump, because that's Donald Trump's main liability. He may well be a convicted felon. So they're really relying on sort of media biases. And I don't mean political biases. I mean biases of political coverage that treat unequal things equally because, hey, we're just neutral, not truthful, to make this strategy succeed.
I can genuinely say I better understand all of this than I did 8 minutes ago. So thanks to both of you for breaking it down.
Thank you.
Pleasure.